Our gospel lesson today is from the 15th chapter of Luke. It's the 1st to the 3rd verse, and then the 11th to the 32nd verse. Hear with me now the word of God. Now, the tax collectors and the sinners were all drawing near to him. And the Pharisees and the scribes murmured, saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that falls to me.' And he divided his living between them. Well, not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took his journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in that country, and he began to be in want. So he went and he joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed the swine. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, but here I perish with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and he came to his father. But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him. He had compassion. And he ran and he embraced him and he kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand, shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let us eat and make merry. For this my son was dead. He is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to make merry. Now his elder son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what this meant. And he said to him, 'Oh, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him safe and sound.' Oh, he was so angry, and he refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, 'Lo, these many years I have served you. I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a kid, that I might make merry with my friends. But when this son of yours is come, who has devoured your living with harlots, you killed for him the fatted calf.' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to make merry and to be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and he's found.'" God's blessings be on the reading of his most holy word. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always in thy sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. This is the parable of the 2 sons, but it's also the parable of the 2 prodigals. You know, in 1986, and I've read a lot of his things and I just cherish them, Henry Nouwen is a Dutch theologian and a writer, and he went to St. Petersburg, Russia, and he went to visit the famous Hermitage there. And he saw, among other things, Rembrandt's painting of the prodigal son. Now, the painting is down the hallway, and it receives natural light of a nearby window. And as he stood there all day looking at it, the sun would change And at every change of the light's angle, he saw a different aspect of the painting revealed, to which he made the remark, there are as many paintings in the prodigal son as there are changes in the day. You know, it's difficult for us sometimes to see something new in this story of the prodigal son. We've heard it so many times that we believe that we've squeezed it dry of meaning. But hear with me something today. You know, in many elementary schools, every few weeks the lost and found box is emptied out and the contents are scattered around, and the coats, mittens, shoes, sweatshirts, gym clothes all are laid down and spread out in hopes that their owners will spot them and take them home. But the scene of all these empty clothes creates a sort of an eerie sensation for some folks, because it's not the clothes that have been left behind, but it's that the children themselves have somehow been lost who own them. They've been zapped out of their clothing and transported to somewhere far away. It sort of gives you an eerie feeling. And it reminds me of losing track of a child. If anyone's ever lost track of a child in a store or somewhere, it's your worst nightmare. It only takes a moment to go from peaceful to panic when you suddenly realize that somehow someone has gone astray. And I'm sorry to tell you this, it's a worry that never stops. And you know, just as you think through it with your children, through that scary I can walk but not really talk phase, then remember when the children went off on that school bus for the first day. I remember that, and I stood there and cried when the boys got on the thing, and my wife was standing there dancing with glee. But nevertheless, they were out of our sight for hours on end. Well, then the children got older and they want to do things like they want to ride their bike to a friend's house, or they want to go to the mall by themselves, or they want to hang out without you quite knowing where they are or what they're doing, right? And for some reason, teenagers always insist on getting their driver's licenses, and then they graduate from high school. Sometimes they go off to college, sometimes they go off to the military, sometimes they get their own place. And it doesn't matter how old they get, parents still want to know where their kids, their children are and how they're doing. Out of sight definitely does not mean for a father or a mother out of mind. But good parents also know that there's a time and a place when letting go is necessary. To grow and develop their own sense of responsibility, to take their own actions seriously, to learn to live with the consequences of those actions. Children have to let go of the family lifeboat, and they have to dare to test the untamed waters of the world. Now, for Jesus' first century audience, this scenario was unfamiliar. For a son to leave his home was unheard of, especially when wanting his share of his father's inheritance before it was his time. More than not, scholar Ken Bailey tells us that being strangers in a strange land, as the Jews were, by having to sell the land early to give his son his birthright, it would have affected every family's standing among those Gentiles. It was as if when he left, he might as well never come back, or he could be strung up by the neighbors, not to mention his own brother who was left to do all the work. Now, you heard the story. You know, the brother goes off, he gambles, and he gives away his entire inheritance in wanton living, and then on his knees amid the pig slop, and I think Jesus added this part to the story because he knew how it would affect those who were hearing it, because as you know, that's offensive to the Jews. In desperation, he swallows his pride. He returns home to avoid certain death and starvation. even at the cost of his humiliating prospect of becoming his own father's servant for the rest of his life. I don't know what's more painful in this story, the starvation or his actually having to admit he made a mistake. You know, I know some folks who would opt to starve to death first before they would ever admit they were wrong. Don't you? Which makes this tale so poignant. Because today I want you to consider who the real prodigal is in this story. Is it the repentant runaway? Or is it the enraged and indignant brother who is endangering the future of his immortal soul in his self-righteousness and his inability to forgive his brother? Now for a moment, let's take a look at this older brother. He's got his arms folded across his chest. He's taking the moral high road. What does he say? But when this son of yours comes back, you killed the fatted calf for him. He cannot bring himself to acknowledge his brother with a name. He doesn't even use his brother's name. He says, this son of yours. Now, a sense of unfairness, as you know, in a family, can turn venomous quickly. Have you ever been there? Sure you have. What are those little words? But that's not fair. Now, perhaps you remember the cartoon strip. I got a laugh out of that. Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin's a little boy with a very overactive imagination, and he has a little stuffed tiger named Hobbes who comes to life as his imaginary friend. And in one cartoon strip, Calvin turns to his friend Hobbes and he says, you know, I feel bad I called Susie names and hurt her feelings. I'm sorry I did that. Hobbes replies, well, maybe you should apologize to her. Calvin thinks about it for a moment, and then his response is, I keep hoping there's a less obvious solution. We have trouble accepting those whom God accepts because we take God's acceptance for granted, and we take God's forgiveness as our right. I ask you this morning, are we much like the older brother who just preferred justice to mercy? Isn't there a part of us sitting here this morning who is thinking that we should have worked, that we have worked for what we have, or so we think? And it's unfair that everyone else should not have to do the same. We have earned God's favor, or so we think, by staying at home. We have merited his acceptance by the good life that we live. So how dare God receive and adopt our sinful brother who has returned home, saying he's sorry? Now the parable this morning does not tell us what the older brother did when his father came out to speak to him. It doesn't reveal to us whether he realized that his envy and disdain had made him just as bad as his younger brother. And the elder brother had never stooped to find himself in the pig pens of life. You know, it's never until you're in the mud and you're looking up